Would stand for the gospel. Jesus tells his followers, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them. For then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your Father may see in secret and will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. The gospel of our Lord. Please be seated. Remember that you are dust. In ancient times, the sign of the cross on your forehead was reserved only for those who were truly public sinners. It was a sign of shame, of disgrace. But as the practice went along, more and more people would come to have the ashes placed on their forehead, realizing that it wasn't just the public displays of sin, but people starting to realize in their private lives how far they had separated themselves from God. And thus, as it evolved over time, everyone would come forward. The sign of the ash, of the dust, comes from the Old Testament creation story. In there we find God forming from the ground Adamah, Adam. We don't hear it in the English because we miss that play on the word Adamah, Adam. From the earth, God created earthling. And in that moment, we learn how intimately connected we are to the totality of God's creation. We are a part of God's creation. We are not God. In the Latin, they picked this up, humus, which forms the root of the word human, humility, humble, humor. That our rightful place in the world is one of humility, which is tied to our humus, our humanness. That from the dust we were created, and to the dust we shall all return. Whether one be royalty or live in rags, the same fate awaits us all. In the pilgrimage Muslims take to Mecca or Medina. A part of the ritual is that they all dress exactly the same. Because in that moment, before God, they are all equals. Whether they be tremendously wealthy or incredibly poor, in that moment before God, they are all equal. Humus, humility, humanness. My daughter called me a little over a week ago. She's in college. This is her first year. And the first words out of her mouth is, "Dad, why did I ever go to a religious school?" Your choice, wasn't mine. Because now I have to take these dumb religion classes. Well, I actually talked her into this one. It's a class on Dietrich Bonhoeffer called Religionless Christianity. And so she said, "Help me out." I said, "What do you need help with?" She said, "Bonhoeffer differentiates between the church, faith, and denomination." I said, "Yes, he did." "Well, what does he mean by those terms?" I said, "Well, first and foremost, when Bonhoeffer speaks of the church, he's not talking about a location. He's not talking about an address. He's not talking about a building. When Bonhoeffer uses the term church, he talks about it in its purest sense, where two or three are gathered, wherever that may be. Wherever they gather in community. I said there are many historians who lament the day the churches started to build buildings because all of a sudden we became incapable of being able to move with the culture. And so instead of going to where the people are, we started to ask the people to come to where we are. And I said for Bonhoeffer, the church is wherever people are. Where they are gathered in Christ's name. There is the church. Well, what is faith, she said. I said, faith is at its very essence simply trust. We put our trust in God. We do not put trust in ourselves. There is nothing I can do. There's no amount of shielding I can acquire that will save me from my humanness. Only God can do that. There was nothing I could do, said Luther. Not by my own reason or even by my own understanding. Come to Jesus Christ. And so Christ calls me through the gospel, enlightens me with his gifts, sanctifies me and keeps me in communion with God and with the church. And at the very essence of that is trust. Trusting God. Well, what about denomination, she said. I said, that's a human invention. And it was invented to mirror the culture of which they were a part of. So they built this mammoth structure. Rome had the Caesar, they had the Pope. Rome had princes, they had cardinals. Rome had regional governors. So the church had bishops. But it's all a human construct. Jesus never once said, "Go ye therefore and make a denomination." Never said that. He said, "Go ye therefore and make disciples, followers." So she said, "Well, what's all this business of the church then?" I said, "You're getting more than you think you are. You see, the church in its purity, the church in its wonder and in its awe, is when people gather wherever that may be. It may be in a building like this. It may be at the granary. It may be at the school. It may be out eating. It may be out in the field. Wherever we gather, that is the church. And the mission of the church is very simple. We are not to show our outward religiosity. That beautiful text from Isaiah. Is this what the Lord requires? That you bow down at the altar, that you put on sackcloth and ash? Jesus brings it up in the Gospel of Matthew, where he says, "Is this what it's about? That you stand on the street corner and pray so that others may see you?" "No," says Isaiah. "Our task is to loose the bonds of injustice, to clothe those who are naked, to shelter those who are homeless, to feed those who are hungry. Then," Isaiah says, "then your light shall shine forth." The church's mission at its very core is to be that light which shines forth. Not bringing attention to myself, but bringing attention to God. Realizing that I am the lucky one simply to be able to participate in it. Not by my doing, but by God's calling. Not by my efforts, but by God's Spirit. Humility. Human. Human. It forms and shapes the very essence of who and of what we are. God's light. God's love. God's balm for the weary world. And now that very same God calls you to come and to receive one of the greatest gifts you will ever receive. The gift of God Himself. And so I invite you now to center your hearts, to join me in prayer. Almighty and ever-living God, we are fully aware, painfully aware, that we have not fulfilled the hope in which you created us. we have not loved you with our whole heart. We have not loved our neighbor as ourselves. And so in this moment, as we begin our Lenten journey, strengthen us. Strengthen us in patience, in peace, in kindness, in meekness, in humility. All for the sake of your Son, Jesus Christ, who in the night in which he was betrayed took bread, he gave thanks, he broke it, he gave it to those he loved, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And after the meal, he took a cup, he gave thanks, and he gave it for all to drink, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood, shed for you and for all people for the forgiveness of sin." For where there is forgiveness, there is life and salvation. Come to us in this meal.